So I came along as a person in 1970, and our review was 3 people, colleagues. The protocol, it was like 2 pages, would come into my office. I would log it in and send it to the reviewer, who was the chair of the committee. And he would write either administratively approved, AA, and his initials, and send it back to me, and that was approval. Or he would say, send it to the other 2. Then I would get 3 opinions back. I would type the 3 opinions, even if they were diverse or contradictory. And I would send it back to them, and then the person would get a response back to me. I would send it back to the chair, and strangely enough, I don't recall any questions on responses. It always got approved at that point. When I left UCSF and started my own for-profit IRB, I called it an independent IRB. When I got here, it was called a for-profit IRB, very disparagingly. Profit was, it's so suspect in the academic world. Originally, OPRR would not condone any externalization of IRBs. It was absolutely verboten. And I had an IRB member who was an old UCSF faculty. He'd retired. He had the protocol approved at UCSF, and now he was transferring it to his new company. It was 9 miles away. And he didn't have an IRB in his new company, so he asked us to review it, and we did. OPRR would not accept the review because we were not internal. So he started his own IRB. It was internal. Now, there were only 3 members in his corporation, so he had his son, his daughter-in-law, his accountant, the lighting designer from down the hall, and me. And that was a superior IRB. As part of that review, which went on for months as OPRR stalled, they asked me directly, how can you prevent conflict of interest? And I wrote back a 10-point rebuttal that I still have somewhere about all the things we do to keep up some sort of firewall. This was somewhere in 1988. And I wrote that, first of all, the money comes into the organization. My company was the organization or institution. An institution is a public or private entity. My company was an institution. The institution had an IRB. The IRB did the reviews. They didn't know who paid. They didn't know who didn't pay. They didn't know how much was charged. So they were free to review or not, to approve or not. Of course, the question came up, well, they knew that if they didn't approve enough things, you'd go out of business. Well, true. But that's no different from an institution that's academic, because you disapprove enough protocols, your IRB is going to, your membership is going to get replaced. So I went through the 10 points. I don't think it was ever accepted, but it provided the groundwork for the later firewalls that we've all developed. Here we are in 2015, and it's like night and day. Everybody, instead of looking down on us, is externalizing their IRB to for-profit. In fact, venture capital-backed companies that all they do is IRB review. They're the IRB professionals. The wall between academia and industry was somewhat pierced as academics went and started companies. Well, many doctors that were in academics went into private practice. They grew up in private practice. What I said earlier about IRB review becoming the accepted thing. As they went into private practice, they realized they no longer had the academic board, and they accepted that they had to pay for services. At the same time, some of the academic IRBs were becoming cost centers, and they were charging industry. So they found they couldn't really say anything about us. So I think the tables were turned eventually. I started my independent IRB in 1984, probably before a lot of the people at this conference were born. I had babies at home, and it was a way to work from home. So a friend of mine started his IRB at the same time, his independent. But he took a second mortgage. He had the capital to pay for electronics, new computers, and I was kind of scrabbling. This is a women's issue. IRBs were run by women. There are men in it, but the administrative core was women. There were a few men, and there still are, but predominantly it's young women. Gloria Steinem was a little older than me, and I grew up reading Now magazine, empowerment. I didn't realize how much you had to take risks, and I didn't take them, which is fine. In retrospect, I got to spend more time with my kids than I would have. Okay, this man who started the same year took second and maybe even a third mortgage, and both he and his wife are lawyers with practices, so that they had more income, but he took risks, and I don't know what the difference is, but he grew his company. He turned to me one time and he said, I've got 35 employees now, and I've got all these HR problems, and I've got to hire an accountant, and it's a real business. And I was operating my business with 3 or 4 of us, and it felt right. It felt like my business. But he sold his business a few years ago for many millions of dollars. And I merged my business with another woman who was on another very female track. I see a feminine thing and a masculine theme, but there's always exceptions to every rule. And of course, Western was started by Angela Bowen, who was a fabulous businesswoman and who was my role model if she were not so private that I couldn't understand what she was doing. But she was incredible. Young women coming into the field, A, take risks, B, it's like going to a liberal arts college. Read broadly. Read broadly. Read, if you're just in the field, join ACRP as well as Primer. Join SOCRA. Find out what life is like for the people whose protocols you review. Read fiction or nonfiction, books about your topic. Right now, we're talking about M-Health. There's a Robin Cook novel that came out 2 years ago called Cell that's all about M-Health gone wrong. So you can read about biospecimens in journals. Find out why they're used. Find out their end use. Read broadly. I see an arc in external review from being bad to being sought. We started with a culture of conscience. We were all working post-Tuskegee, and the history was current. Those were current stories. We then went to a culture of compliance. FDA comes in, and all we care about is the checklist, the documentation, the minutes, as if those were protecting subjects. They aren't. It's the discussion, it's when the student comes in with a lousy protocol in the college IRB, that you take the time to educate that student. When the fellow comes in and they aren't getting mentored, but you take the time. You're not just a big amorphous IRB. You're a face there for ethics. And I'd like to see our field go from a culture that's really, maybe we're passing the culture of compliance, and maybe we're headed towards something new. I'm hoping it's back to conscience, but maybe it's something new. But just leave I know we have to have compliance. I know we have to have metrics, but we can't be all that. I don't think that we ought to be named ethics committees until we can get back there.